Help wanted, the murder of Nora Fuller, 1902. An elegantly dressed, middle-aged man was looking for a house to rent on that wintry day of January 8, 1902. He wandered around San Francisco's Sutter Street, scouting for empty homes. Then he walked into the real estate office of Umson & Company to inquire about the house at 2211 Sutter Street. It was indeed vacant, the clerk told him, and discreetly asked for references. The man said that his name was C.B. Hawkins. He admitted that he had no references because he and his wife had been living at the Golden West Hotel. Hawkins said that he was willing to pay for the first month's rent in advance to ease any concerns about payment. The real estate clerk thought his client looked like a businessman and agreed to rent him the house. The transaction completed, he handed him a receipt for the rent and the keys to the house. He didn't contact the Golden West Hotel to check whether Hawkins was, in fact, registered there as a guest. Had he done so, he would have discovered that there was no one by the name of Hawkins staying at the hotel. Now that Hawkins had a place to live, he clearly needed some furnishings. The next day he went into J.C. Kavanaugh's, a furniture store at 848 Mission Street. He told the salesman that he just needed a few items to furnish a room temporarily. He picked out 2 pillows, a pair of blankets, a comforter, and a second-hand mattress. He wanted to be sure that Kavanaugh's would bring that particular mattress, so he lifted up the corner of the mattress and scribbled his initials on the underside. It was late in the day, but Hawkins demanded that the mattress and bedding be delivered to his house that night. No delivery, no sale, he said. The salesman explained that the delivery boy would have to work late to accommodate the request, but Hawkins insisted. Shortly afterwards, the delivery boy dragged the bedding up the steps of the darkened house at 2211 Sutter Street and rang the bell. A man wearing a top hat appeared in the doorway and told him to leave the mattress and other items inside the hallway. The boy complied. Hawkins had still more shopping to do. On January 10 he went to the Standard Furniture Company at 745 Mission Street and bought a second-hand bed and an old chair from salesman Richard Fitzgerald. This time he let the deliverman carry the heavy pieces up to the second floor and insisted that he assemble the bed.
That same day, an advertisement appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle. Young girl to take care of baby, good home and good wages, Box 120 Chronicle, it said. 15-year-old Nora Fuller, who was looking for work, spotted the ad. She was born in China in 1886, the daughter of English parents. Her mother, who brought her to San Francisco after her father died, was remarried to a man named W. Fuller but later divorced him.
Nora and her younger brother Louis lived with their mother at 1747 Fulton Street.
Money was tight, and Nora discussed the job opportunity with her mother. Mrs. Fuller agreed to let her daughter respond to the ad immediately. Nora sent a note to the mailbox listed in the ad, expressing her interest in the position.
A postcard arrived the next day. Miss Fuller, in answer to yours in response to my advertisement, kindly call at the popular restaurant, 55 Geary Street, and inquire for Mr. John Bennett, at 1 o'clock. If you can't come at 1, come at 6. J.B. The message arrived too late that Saturday for Nora Fuller to arrive at the restaurant at 1 p.m., but she knew she could still make it for 6 p.m. She got dressed quickly and ate an apple. Her mother gave her money to buy groceries on her way home after the interview. Nora put the postcard with the instructions in her pocket and left the house at 5 p.m. At about the same time, a customer arrived at the popular restaurant and sat down at a table. He had been coming to the restaurant on and off for about 15 years and was known among the staff as Tenderloin because he always ordered a porterhouse steak and only ate the tenderloin portion. Half an hour after he had been seated, the customer began getting impatient. He stood up and walked over to the counter. He told restaurant owner Mr. F.W. Crone that he was expecting a young girl and to please send her to his table when she arrived. He waited impatiently for another half hour before abandoning his seat. He stepped outside and paced up and down the sidewalk. Then he was gone. Nobody ever knew whether or not Fuller had arrived for her appointment. Shortly afterwards, the telephone rang at the Fuller house. Nora's brother Louis answered. A voice on the other end said that it was Nora. and that she was at Mr. Bennett's house at 1500 Geary Street. He wanted her to start work immediately. As he held the receiver, Lewis relayed the message to his mother in the kitchen. She replied that Lewis was to tell his sister to come home and wait until Monday to begin her new job. She added that he was to remind her to stop by the grocery store and pick up some items. Lewis followed his mother's instructions. The voice on the other end of the phone answered, "All right. Tell Mama I'll bring them." It was the last that anyone heard from a person believed to be Nora. Unknown to her family, the address that Lewis was given for the Bennett residence, 1500 Geary, was a vacant lot. 5 days later, on January 16, 1902, Mrs. Fuller finally contacted police and told them that her daughter had been missing since Saturday. Nora had not been seen or heard from since she went to a job interview in response to a newspaper advertisement. Mrs. Fuller was worried that her daughter had been kidnapped. Police were not convinced. Given that one of her friends had run away recently, they believed that Nora had followed suit. They changed their mind about that theory 3 weeks later. It was Mr. H.E. Dean's job to inspect rental properties belonging to Umson and Company whenever they became vacant. The latest tenant at 2211 Sutter Street, a Mr. Hawkins, had rented the flat for only a month before leaving again. The vacant 2-story White House needed to be cleaned and prepared so that it could be rented to another tenant. On February 8, 1902, Dean walked up the littered steps and unlocked the door. As he wandered from room to room on the first floor, he noticed that the doors to all the rooms had been left open. There was no furniture, and the place was deserted except for an empty whiskey bottle on the mantel. Dean climbed the stairs to the second floor. As he inspected the property, he nearly missed a tiny room at the back. It was the only one whose door was closed. Dean opened the door to the darkened room. The shades were drawn, concealing the afternoon sun, but there was just enough light seeping through for him to see the form of a naked woman lying on the bed with nothing covering her. Sensing something wrong, he rushed outside and found a policeman standing on the corner. The police officer accompanied Dean back to the house and entered the tiny room at the back. When he lifted up the window shades, they both saw that a young girl was lying on the bed. Her long dark hair was spread over the pillow. On the only chair beside the bed were piled outer garments, a pair of laced shoes, a pink cotton undershirt, dark stockings, and a torn white chemise. Embarrassed by the immodesty of the scene, the policeman grabbed some clothing from the chair and covered up the body. Then he went to alert police headquarters. Nora Fuller had been murdered. Her purse, which was left behind on the chair, had a key to the front door of the Fuller home on Fulton Street. Strangely, the postcard with the details of her meeting with Mr. Bennett was missing. It was her mother who told police about the note. Nora's body was taken to the morgue that night for an autopsy while the police began their investigation and tried to track down her killer. Detectives contacted people and visited businesses from the Tenderloin to Mission Street. At the popular restaurant, the owner's son told police that the man who was waiting to meet a young girl on January 11th was about 40 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighed about 160 pounds. He had a brown mustache, was well dressed, and appeared refined. Salesmen at both furniture stores gave the same description of a man who bought bedding and other furnishings for 2211 Sutter Street. The police concluded that John Bennett and C.B. Hawkins were one and the same person. Now they had a description of their suspect, but that did not lead them any closer to Nora Fuller's killer. As investigators followed the trail, it led them back to the little house on Sutter Street. Detectives returned to the scene of the crime to look for clues. They pored over mail that C.B. Hawkins/John Bennett had received at the Golden West Hotel and on Sutter Street, but none indicated where he could be found. A search of the house turned up a cigar butt in the room where Nora was discovered. A receipt from the furniture store for the bedding was found on a shelf in the back of the bedroom closet. Fingerprint identification in a criminal investigation was first used in Argentina in 1892 to identify a woman who murdered her 2 sons and left a bloody print on a doorpost, but it wasn't until a few years after the Fuller murder that police forces and prisons in the United States would begin to use this latest forensic technology. As detectives continued their search of the house, they noted that the fireplaces showed no signs of having been used. There were no papers or indications that someone had eaten in the house. Police checked with the San Francisco Utilities Company, but there was no record of them having received an application for water or gas for 2211 Sutter Street. Neighbors said that between January 11th and February 8th, they did not see anyone enter or leave the house. For days after Nora Fuller's body was discovered, her mother went to the morgue and confirmed her identity by pointing to a vaccination mark on Nora's left leg. Then Mrs. Fuller was taken for a short tour of the house where her daughter had died. Coroner Dr. Bacigalupi released the results of the autopsy, which indicated that Nora had been strangled to death. Dr. Charles Morgan had examined the contents of her stomach and found traces of alcohol and signs that she was unaccustomed to drinking it. She died 1 or 2 hours after eating an apple, he added. This forensic information suggested that Nora Fuller was murdered the evening of January 11th, just a few short hours after she left home for the final time. An inquest was held into the circumstances surrounding the teenager's death. Her friend, 17-year-old Madge Graham, testified that Nora had often spoken about a friend named Bennett. Graham speculated that the job advertisement placed in the San Francisco Chronicle was merely a ruse to fool Mrs. Fuller. She said that Mrs. Fuller was strict and Nora sometimes had to leave the house to telephone some man away from her mother's prying eyes and ears. Graham claimed that Nora had once asked her friend to say that the two teenagers were going to the theater together. It was a cover to allow Nora to go out and see some man. Nora had a reputation in her neighborhood as being a devoted daughter, and therefore few people placed much stock in the story of these clandestine telephone calls and meetings. The police captain of detectives John Seymour headed up the investigation and went searching for more clues. A reward of $5,000 was offered for information leading to the arrest of the crime's perpetrator, which led to a flood of people telephoning or sending in letters with potential leads. Interest in Nora's murder was high. The police wanted to return her personal effects to her family, but they had disappeared. People scavenging for souvenirs had taken the items. Handwriting expert Theodore Kitka was hired to read through change of address cards at the post office. Police hoped that he would find some with handwriting that matched that of the elusive Mr. Hawkins on the lease that he had signed for the house. Kitka examined 32,000 cards and found 3 that had similar writing. A fourth one was from someone requesting a change of address from San Francisco to Kansas City. It seemed like a long shot, but Captain Seymour didn't want to leave any stone unturned. He took the train to Missouri and interviewed the bewildered man. As it turned out, he had nothing to do with Nora Fuller's death. While Seymour was in Kansas City, police found another lead. San Francisco newspapers had carried a story on January 18th about the disappearance of a clerk named Charles B. Hadley. The man had worked at the San Francisco Examiner, and his accounts at work had been found to be short. A detective learned that he had been living at a hotel on Ellis Street at the time with a young woman named Ollie Blasier. When interviewed, Blasier said that Hadley had walked out on her and she had no idea where he went. The following day, newspapers published copies of the Hawkins signature as it appeared on the lease with Umsen and Company. Blasier thought it looked similar to Hadley's signature on a photo he had given her. She went to police headquarters and handed them the photo and signature. Kitka compared it with the Hawkins signature and found that the two were identical. There was just one problem. Hadley was clean-shaven whereas Hawkins was not. Blasier explained that Hadley had a collection of false mustaches that he sometimes wore. Kitka touched up the photo of Hadley, adding a mustache and a silk plug hat. He then showed it to everyone who had seen Bennett or Hawkins. Most agreed that it resembled the man they had met, except for the restaurant owner. Seymour was convinced that Bennett, Hawkins, and Hadley were all the same person. Then he received word from Minneapolis that Hadley was really Charles Start, who had been wanted for embezzlement since 1889. The detective printed out and distributed thousands of circulars with information about the suspect in Nora Fuller's murder, but no clues turned up. Neither did the man of many aliases. Nora Fuller's killer was never found.